Her mother's death day was the day her husband beat her most. A Lakota chief held her instead. The mare came in limping on the left foreleg, and I was already on my knees in the mud before I had a reason to look up. That is when I saw her. She was standing at the tree line where our land meets the Haskell Creek, which in October runs barely a trickle between gray stones. She was not moving. She was wearing a dark dress, the kind of dress a woman wears to say something solemn, and her hands were pressed flat against the bark of the big cottonwood that has stood there longer than I have been alive. She was not leaning against it. She was pressing her palms into it the way a person presses a wound. I did not call to her. I had seen women like that before, not often, but enough. I finished checking the mare's leg, a small stone wedged in the hoof, nothing worse, and I kept my eyes down because a person standing like that does not want to be watched. I know what it is to not want to be watched. I have stood in places myself where I needed a tree or a rock wall or just the open dark to hold the weight of me for a minute. So I gave her the time she needed, and I walked the mare slow back toward the corral, and I did not look over my shoulder. But when I came back out, she was still there. The light had shifted. The sky to the west had gone the color of old copper, and the cottonwood threw a long shadow back across the creek. She had not moved. Her hands were still on the bark. I took the long way around to the water trough. Close enough that if she needed something she could speak, far enough that she did not have to. She said nothing. I said nothing either. But I did not go back inside. I should back up. The land I have lived on for 30 years sits on the eastern slope of the foothills, where the ground flattens out enough to be useful, and there is enough water from the creek to get a person through a dry summer if they are not wasteful. I have 140 acres under my name on the county record, which happened during one of the treaty adjustment periods when they were running new lines, and an older man who understood what was coming helped me get it done the right way. I was 31 then and already chief of my band, which was smaller by then than it had been before and smaller now than it was in my 30s. But we were here, and we were managing, and managing is sometimes the whole of it. The band has its own place up in the hills about 4 miles from my house. I live separately not because I was pushed out, but because, after Winona died and after a certain stretch of hard years, I needed the particular quiet of my own walls and my own days. I am still chief. I still go when I am needed, but I sleep in my own house and I wake up in my own morning, and that arrangement has served me for 12 years. Before Elsa I had become efficient, I suppose is the word, not cold, just stripped down to what was necessary. I knew which things needed doing and I did them. I ate what needed eating. I slept when I needed sleeping. I went to council. I came back. I fixed fences. I kept the horses well. There was a rhythm to it that was not painful and not joyful, just the rhythm of a man who has stopped expecting certain things and made his peace with that. I thought I had made my peace with it anyway. Her name was Elsa Pryor, half Ojibwe on her mother's side, which you could see in the set of her cheekbones and the dark of her hair. Her husband, Frank Pryor, ran a small cattle operation 3 miles north, and when I say small, I mean barely enough to keep from starving. He drank. Everybody in the territory knew it. Everybody also acted like they did not know it, which is a kind of cruelty that passes for politeness. I knew Frank Pryor the way a man knows a rock in the road. You know it is there, you go around it, you do not think much about it unless you have to. He had come to me once about water rights, speaking loud the way men do when they are afraid and do not want to show it. I told him what I told everybody. The creek belongs to no one person. He did not like that answer. He left without saying goodbye. That was the extent of my knowing him. Elsa I had seen at the trading post twice, maybe 3 times. She bought flour and she bought lamp oil and she kept her eyes on the counter. A quiet woman, not the quiet of someone at peace. The quiet of someone who has learned that being noticed is dangerous. I knew that kind of quiet too. But I did not know her, not then. I should say, though the word sits wrong on me, I am the chief of a small Lakota band that had come to settle in the Black Hills foothills 40 years ago, before the treaties turned to ash and the army came to redraw everything. We had not been run off entirely. We had stayed by being still mostly, by not fighting every fight, by choosing. I had choices forced on me that I still carry at night when the quiet gets too full. My name is Chask. It means firstborn son. I was the firstborn of a man who lived to be old and a woman who did not, and I have been first in line for things all my life, the first to go to council, the first to speak, the first to stand between my people and whatever was coming down the road this time. I am 61 years old. My hair has been gray for 10 years. My wife, Winona, died of fever 12 winters ago, and after her I did not take another. Not because there was no one. Because I did not have anything left to give that was worth giving. That is the honest truth of it. People respected me, came to me with their problems. I decided things and I carried what needed carrying, and I did it because it needed doing, not because it made me feel whole. Nothing made me feel whole anymore. That is not a complaint. That is just the particular kind of loneliness that comes to a man who has given most of himself away, piece by piece, over a long time. I was managing. I thought I was anyway. She was still at the tree when the light went entirely. I brought a lantern out, not to give to her, just to hang it on the post near the corral fence, close enough that she would not be in the full dark. I had seen enough people in the full dark by themselves when they should not have been. She turned when she heard my boots on the frozen ground. I expected her to apologize. A woman like that, taught to shrink, the first thing they usually do when they realize they have been noticed is apologize for existing. But she did not. She just looked at me. Her face was not what I expected. There were no tears on it. She had passed through tears already, I think, earlier in the day, and what was left was something past tears, something harder and quieter. Her right cheekbone was swollen. Not fresh, a day old maybe too. The yellow-green of it showed even in the low light. I looked at it 1 second, and then I looked at her eyes, and I kept my eyes there, because she needed to know I saw it, but she also needed to know I was not going to make it the whole conversation. I said, "You are welcome to come in out of the cold if you need to." She looked at me for a long moment. Her hands were still pressed against her sides like she was holding herself together by pressure alone. She said, "It is the anniversary of my mother's death." I said, "I know what anniversaries are." She said, "He always seems to know it too." I did not say anything to that. There was nothing to say to that. What she had just told me was not a complaint. It was a fact she had been carrying alone for a long time and needed to set down somewhere, even for a minute, even in front of a near stranger. I held the door open and she walked in. My house is not much. It is a log and daub structure with 2 rooms, solid but plain. I have a good stove and a long table and a shelf of things, a few books, some tools, a pipe I no longer smoke, a small carved figure Winona made out of river bone when she was young, before I knew her. I keep things tidy because there is nobody else here to keep them tidy, and disorder never sat well with me. She sat at the table and I put water on for tea, and I did not ask her questions. She was looking at her hands, which were still pressed flat on the table now, palms down, the way they had been on the tree bark. I noticed that. A woman who has learned to brace herself. I put a cup of tea in front of her and I sat down across the table, and I did not ask her questions because I could see she did not need questions. She needed a room that was not loud. She needed a man who was not Frank Pryor. She said, "I always go to the cottonwood on this day. My mother planted it," or she said she did. I do not know if that is true or if she only wanted it to be true, which comes to the same thing, I suppose. I said probably true. Women know which trees they planted. She almost smiled, not quite. She said my mother was Ojibwe. My father was a trapper out of Minnesota. He was not a bad man. He was just not often there, So it was just us, my mother and me, for most of it. She died when I was 19. Fever. I said mine too. My mother, fever is an ugly way. She nodded, and something in her face shifted slightly. The way a person shifts when they find out the person across from them has walked some of the same ground. She said, I married Frank the same year. Not because I loved him, because I was 19 and alone and afraid and he was there. I have spent 22 years paying for that decision. She said it flat, no self-pity in it, just the math of her life laid out. I did not tell her it was not her fault. She already knew that somewhere. And sometimes when a person says a hard, true thing, they do not need you to argue with it or soften it. They just need you to hear it without looking away. I heard it. I did not look away. We sat there a long time. The stove ticked. Outside the wind had come up, the kind of dry October wind that carries dust even when there has been no dust for weeks. It finds it somewhere. I refilled her cup twice. She did not drink most of it, but she kept her hands around it. She said, why did you wait? I said, wait for what? She said, at the tree. You came out twice. You did not ask what was wrong. You did not send me away. You just waited. I thought about how to answer that. I said, because you were not done yet. She looked at me. I said, whatever you were doing at that tree, you were not finished. A man who interrupts that is not helping. He is just making himself feel useful. She was quiet a moment. Then she said, Frank always interrupts it, not the way you mean. He interrupts it because he knows that is the day when I am already broken open, and a broken open person is easier to break the rest of the way. The words landed hard. I felt them land. I said, he will not be coming here tonight. Not a question, a fact I was making true by saying it. She looked at me and I held her gaze. I am not a small man and I have been doing this a long time, and she needed to know that what I said was not a hope, but a certainty. If Frank Pryor came to my door that night, he would find something he was not prepared for. She knew it. She exhaled slowly, the first full exhale I had seen from her since she walked in. She said very quietly, thank you. Sometime past midnight she fell asleep sitting up at the table, her cheek resting on her folded arms. I got a blanket from the back room and I put it over her shoulders and I sat back down and I watched the stove. I was not watching her, that is not what I mean. I was just present in the same room, that was all. I had not been present with another person in a long time. Not the way I mean. I am present in councils. I am present in negotiations. I have been present in fights and in funerals and in all the official occasions of a man who carries responsibility. But I had not been simply present, awake in a quiet room with a person who was sleeping safely because I was there, since Winona. It was a strange feeling, not sentimental, not romantic, just wait, the good kind of wait, the feeling of being somewhere that needed you to be there and that being enough. The stove ticked. Outside the wind worked at the corners of the house. An owl spoke once, somewhere in the big trees east of the creek, and did not speak again. I sat with it and I thought about the kind of night she had had. I thought about what it meant to have a day, every year, when the grief of losing your mother sits on you like weather, and the man who is supposed to be your protection uses that openness against you. I have known grief. I have known the particular rawness of an anniversary. I have never known someone who waited for that rawness and saw it as an opportunity. I thought about that for a long time, the specific rottenness of it. A man who understands exactly when his wife is most broken open and chooses that day to break her further. There is no name for that I wanted to say in a clean room with a sleeping woman in it, so I did not say it. I sat with the particular anger that comes not from wanting to act, but from understanding clearly what kind of thing exists in the world. Then I let it settle. Anger held too long becomes something that damages the person holding it. I know that from experience. What I kept instead was something simpler. She had come to the cottonwood. She had been standing there when the dark came, and she had still been standing there. And then she had come in and sat at my table and said things she needed to say aloud. And now she was asleep in a chair with a blanket around her and her hands quiet and her face, finally, slack. She was safe tonight. That was the whole of it. Tonight she was safe, and I was the reason. I did not know what to do with that feeling exactly. But I sat with it anyway, the whole long way down to morning. She woke at first gray light. She looked around, the quick, alarmed look of a person who does not know for a second where they are. Then she settled. She saw me. She settled more. I said, "There is still water warm on the stove." She straightened up, pulled the blanket tighter, and looked at the small window. The world outside was the pale nothing color of early morning. She looked tired in the real way, not the broken way from the night before, just tired. She said, "I should go before he wakes up." I said, "I will walk you." She looked at me. I said, "Not all the way, only to the ridge, so you are not alone on the road." She did not argue. Smart woman. She knew what the road looked like at that hour, and she knew what it looked like with a Lakota chief walking beside her, and she knew those were two different roads. We walked in the gray morning with frost crackling under our boots and the world still mostly asleep. I kept to her left, the side toward the open country, and I matched her pace, which was steady but not fast. A woman who has learned not to appear afraid, even when she is. At the ridge she stopped. Below I could see the smear of smoke from the prior place just starting up. He was awake then, or the fire had been banked and was just catching. She stood there a moment looking down at it. I stood beside her. She said, "I used to think there was something wrong with me, that I deserved it somehow, that I had done something." I said, "You planted yourself next to the wrong tree." She turned and looked at me. I said, "It is not the tree's fault." She was quiet a long moment. Then she said, "No, it is not." She looked back down at the smoke. Then she said, not to me, maybe to herself or to the morning or to her dead mother somewhere in it, "I do not know how much longer I can do this." I said, "I know." A pause. I said, "When you are ready to stop, you know where I am." She looked at me, not startled, not girlish about it. She looked at me the way a woman looks at a man when she is measuring something real, something that matters, something she cannot afford to get wrong. That kind of looking, careful and steady. She said, "You mean that?" I said, "I have never said a thing I did not mean." She held my eyes another moment. Then she turned and started down the hill. I watched her until I could not see her any more. 3 weeks passed and then 4. I did not go looking for her. That is important. I did not go looking for her. That would have been wrong in a way I cannot fully explain but know in my bones. She had to come back on her own terms or not at all, and whatever she decided I would not be the thing that pressured it. But I thought about her. I will be honest. I thought about her hands on the table. I thought about the way she had exhaled when I said Frank Pryor was not coming through my door. I thought about what it meant that I had stayed awake beside a sleeping woman, not out of wanting, but out of just needing to be there. That old feeling, I thought, was gone from me. The first snow came at the end of October, early for that country. A real snow, not a dusting. 4 inches overnight, and the world went white and quiet. I was chopping wood at first light when I heard hooves on the road. I did not stop chopping. I kept my eyes down and my rhythm steady, but I listened. The hooves stopped at my gate. I set the axe in the block, and I turned around. She was on a horse I had not seen before, a plain sorrel, a solid animal, and she had a canvas bag tied to the saddle. She was wearing her dark dress again, but over it a heavy coat, men's coat, too big for her. Her face was clear. Not happy, not yet, but clear. She said, "You said you meant it." I said I did. She said, "I have $40. I have the horse. I have what is in that bag. I have nothing else and nowhere else to go. And Frank does not know yet that I left, but he will know by tonight." I said, "Step down off the horse then." She looked at me one more second, that same measuring look, the real kind. Then she stepped down. She handed me the reins of the sorrel and she stood in my gate and she looked at the place, the small cabin, the corral, the woodpile, the wide open of the country beyond, and I waited for her to see it for what it was, which was not much by certain measures, which was enough by mine. She said, "I will pull my weight." I said, "I never thought otherwise." She nodded once, the way a person nods when a thing is settled. I took the sorrel's reins and I walked it to the corral, and I did not hurry, because there was no need to hurry now. She followed me. She helped me take the saddle off without being asked, and she knew what she was doing, which told me things about her and her life I had not known. We worked beside each other in the early morning with the snow still bright and unmarked all around us, and the steam coming off the horse, and neither of us talking. It felt like something. It felt like the kind of something you do not say aloud, yet, because saying it aloud makes it small, and it is not small. She unpacked that canvas bag at the table that evening. I did not watch her do it. I was tending the stove and I kept my back to her, partly out of respect, and partly because there are things a person needs to do without eyes on them. Taking stock of what you have salvaged is one of those things. But I heard it. The sound of a woman emptying a bag in a quiet house. A few soft thunks clothing, I guessed. The clink of something glass. A long pause. Then the quietest sound of all, which was her taking a breath and letting it out, the kind of breath that comes at the end of something rather than the beginning. She said behind me, "I have my mother's comb." I said, "Good." She said, "I thought about leaving it. I almost left it because I thought, I don't know what I thought, that I didn't deserve to take it with me, that it belonged to that place." I turned around then. She was holding it, a wide-toothed bone comb, old, the kind made to last. She was looking at it the way you look at something that carries more weight than its size justifies. I said, "You were the one who kept it, 22 years. That comb belongs to you." She looked up at me. Something moved behind her eyes and then settled. She set the comb on the shelf beside my stove, which was not where I would have put it, which was exactly right. A person makes a place theirs by putting things where they decide, not where they were told. I did not say anything about the comb being on the shelf. She glanced at me to see if I would. I went back to the stove. The first week was its own kind of negotiation, the way any first week is. Not an argument, nothing like that. Just two people learning the shape of each other's days. When I rose, which was before first light. When she rose, which was not long after, and in silence, the good silence of a person who understands that mornings belong to themselves before they belong to anyone else. Who did the stove and who did the water? Little things. The kind of things you never think about until two people have to sort them out. She asked me once if I had a routine she was breaking. I said, "You are not breaking anything." She said, "I want to know. I do not want to be in the way." I put down what I was doing and I looked at her. I said, "Elsa, you are not in the way, you are here." She held my gaze for a moment. That word "here" landed different than the other words, and we both felt it and neither of us pressed on it. She went back to what she was doing. I went back to what I was doing. But the word hung in the room like warm smoke after a fire, and it was not unpleasant. The third day she found the books on my shelf, and she ran her finger across the spines without pulling any of them out, the way a person does in a library they're not sure they're allowed to use. I said, "Read whatever you want." She looked at me, said, "You read." It was not a question, but it had a question in it. I knew what the question was. A Lakota chief with a shelf of books in a log house was not something certain people expected. I said, "I had a teacher at the mission school when I was 9 years old, an old man from Pennsylvania. He had fought in the war back east. He believed reading was the one thing no one could take from you once you had it. He used to say that with a kind of fury, like someone had tried to take it from him once. I believed him. I read anything I could get my hands on. She said Frank did not read. I said no. She said he thought books were for women and cowards. She said it flat, just the fact of it, and then she pulled a thin volume from the shelf. I saw the spine. It was a collection of poems, Whitman. I had read it many times, and she went and sat by the window with it. I watched her for a moment. Woman sitting in lamplight with a book she had chosen from a shelf that was now partly hers. I went to chop wood. Some feelings a man deals with by hitting something. Frank Pryor came that afternoon. I had expected him, not feared him, expected him. A man like that has a kind of logic to him, brutal and small, and the logic said he would come. He came with one other man, a hand of his name Decker, who had the look of a man who does things for other men, because he is afraid to do things for himself. The two of them rode up to my gate, and Frank called out my name in the loud voice he used when he was afraid. I came out. He said she was his wife, and she was his property, and she had no right to be on my land. I said she was a grown woman who had come to my home of her own will. He said he would go to the law. I said go. He looked past me, trying to see through the door, and I shifted just enough to take up more of what he could see. Not aggressive, just present, just there. He called me something ugly. He called her something uglier. I did not move, did not speak, just let him hear what he was saying in the echo of the silence after it. Decker, behind him, was looking at his horse's ears. Frank Pryor sat there another minute in the cold, and then he looked at me, really looked at me for probably the first time in his life, and something went out of his face. Not courage. He had not had courage. What went out was the certainty that the world would make this easy for him. He turned his horse around. He left. He did not come back. I went inside. She was at the table. She had made coffee. She was sitting with her hands around a cup, and she was watching the door. She said, "Did he go?" I said he went. She let out a breath. Then she said, "Do you think he will come back?" I said no. She asked how I knew. I said, because he saw that it would cost him more than he was willing to pay. She was quiet a moment. Then she said, "I have been waiting 22 years for someone to make it cost him something." I sat down across from her. The coffee was good. She had found where I kept the grounds without asking, which made me feel a particular way I had not felt in a long time. A person making themselves at home, making the place more itself by being in it. I said, "It is done now." She said, "Yes." We sat there while the afternoon light moved across the table and the stove ticked, and the horse shifted in the corral outside, and neither of us felt the need to say anything more just then, because there was nothing more that needed saying just then. But I will tell you what I thought sitting there. I thought about the fact that I had done nothing remarkable. I had stood in my own gate. I had looked at a man who needed looking at. I had not moved, and I had not flinched, and I had said nothing that wasn't true. That was the sum of it, a very small set of actions. And yet, Elsa was sitting across from me with her hands around a cup of coffee in a warm house, and Frank Pryor was riding away in the cold, and she was safe in a way she had not been safe in 22 years. All of that from standing in a gate, from being a certain kind of man in a certain kind of moment, and not being anything less. I had spent 40 years making hard calls, fighting things worth fighting, standing in the way of things that needed standing in the way of. And here was this quiet small thing, a man at a gate, a woman at a table, and it felt, sitting in that afternoon light, like the most worth-doing thing I had done in a long time. Not because it was grand, because it was necessary and real, and she was here. I refilled her cup. She said without looking up, "I did not know if anyone would come." I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "When I was deciding whether to go, I kept thinking, even if I left, where would I go? Who would take me? Who would stand between me and him? I did not have an answer. She paused. Then she said, and then I thought of the night at the cottonwood, and the morning after, and what you said. I said I meant it. She said, I know you did. That is why I came. She looked up then. Her eyes were steady. Not tearful. She was past the time in her life when a thing like this made her cry. But there was something in them that was undefended, which is rarer than tears and more important. She said, I want you to know that I am going to be worth it. I am going to earn my place here. I said, Elsa. She waited. I said, you walked out of a life on $40 and a horse and the nerve to start over. You already earned it. She held my eyes. Then she looked back down at her cup. After a moment she said quietly, all right. And that was that. The talk in the territory about us started up within a week, as talk does. A Lakota chief and a Waitajibwe woman who used to be married to the prior drunk. People had opinions. People always have opinions. Some of the opinions were kind and some were not, and a few came directly to me in various forms, which I will not detail except to say I dealt with each one by asking a simple question. Is this your life? It never was. 2 men from town rode out in November on the pretext of checking on water rights. Same excuse Frank had used, which told me they had talked, and I gave them the same answer I had given Frank years before. And then I answered every other question they didn't quite ask by the simple fact of standing in front of them the way I was. A man who had been chief for 40 years, who had not gotten there by being afraid of other people's opinions, who was standing on his own land in front of his own house, and whose patience with being managed was not infinite. They left reasonably quickly. My counsel had their own questions, slower, more careful the way elders ask things. I gave them the truth. A woman in trouble came to me and I did not turn her away, and she stayed, and that was the way of it. They sat with that. The older ones, the ones who had known Winona, looked at me a certain way, not approving or disapproving, just reading me, checking whether I was all right, whether this was a thing I had chosen with my eyes open. I told them, I have been chief for 40 years. I know what choosing with open eyes looks like. The oldest man in the council, Maka, who was 78 and remembered things none of the rest of us were old enough to remember, said, Good. He said it only once, and he said it the way he said things that were final. And after that, for the council at least, it was settled. I came home that night and found Elsa sitting by the window with Whitman again, and the stove banked high and a pot of something on it, and I thought, not for the first time. I had become a man accustomed to coming home to a quiet house, and the quiet had seemed all right to me because I had forgotten the other kind. I remembered it now. Every evening I remembered it again. That winter was long. They mostly are in that country. We worked. There is no better way to say it. We worked alongside each other the way two people who trust each other work, not always in the same place, not always with words, but always with the other person in mind. She knew horses. She knew the kind of steady, patient work that keeps a place from falling apart, and she did it without being asked, and without wanting to be thanked for it. That last part especially. She did not want to be thanked for things she considered simply her part of the day. I had never known a woman like that. I had known hard-working women. I had known capable women. But Winona, God rest her, had wanted to be seen doing things. Not in a bad way, just that wanting to be seen is human, and she was human. Elsa was different. Elsa worked like she was doing it for the thing itself, for the satisfaction of the thing done well, and what you thought about it was your own business. It was the most relaxing thing I had known in years. In December the cold came down hard, and the creek froze solid, and I started bringing the horses in at night rather than leave them in the corral. That meant rising twice in the dark to check them, which I had always done alone. One night I came back from the second check and found Elsa already at the stove, kettle on, 2 cups set out. She did not say anything. She handed me a cup and went back to whatever she was reading. I stood there a moment with the cold still on me from outside, and the cup warm in both hands, and I thought, this is a thing I did not know I was missing. Not the cup, not even the warmth, just the fact of someone knowing you would come back in cold and thinking ahead of it. Small things, the winter was full of them. There were also the sessions with my counsel, 3 of which fell in January. I would ride out for a day or 2 at a time, and she would be alone with the place. When I came back the first time, I was braced for, I do not know what I was braced for, some sign that something had gone wrong, or that the solitude had been too much, or that she had changed her mind about the whole arrangement. Instead, the place was as I had left it, better even. She had found a rot in one of the fence posts I had not noticed, and she had shored it with a spare beam until I could replace it. She showed me this without ceremony, just pointed to it and said, "That post will not hold the spring mud." I said I would replace it in March. She said she had thought as much, which was why she had shored it. I looked at her. She said, "I know how to look at wood. My mother's father was a builder. Some things you learn early." I said, "What else do you know?" She thought about it. Then she said, "I know horses, and I know wood, and I know which plants do not kill you. I know how to be quiet in a room where it is important to be quiet. I know how to wait." I said, "You have been waiting a long time." She said, "I am done waiting." She said it without drama, just the new fact of her life stated plainly. I said, "Good." She said, "Good." We went inside, and she had made something with dried beans and salt pork that smelled better than it had any right to. And we ate it at the table in the lamplight, with the wind making itself heard at the door and not getting in. There were hard days, too. Days when she went quiet in a particular way that I knew meant she was thinking about something dark, some memory the body carries that the mind tries to put away. On those days I did not ask. I just stayed close, worked near her, let her know by the simple fact of being there that the room she was in was a safe room. I understood those days from the inside. I had my own version of them, calls I made in my younger years that I could not unmake. A boy in my band, 15 years old, who died in a skirmish 20 years ago because I sent him where I should have gone myself. I have the full list. I do not share it with people often, but I think Elsa knew I had it from some recognition in her when the quiet came over me. She gave me the same thing I gave her, presence without pressure. We were, I suppose, teaching each other how to be all right. There were nights when she woke up. The first time it happened, I heard her from across the house, and I came to the doorway and she was sitting up with her hand pressed against the wall. Same as the tree, same instinct. I said her name once quiet. She looked at me. I said, "You are here, not there, here." She nodded. She lay back down. I went back to my bed. But I did not sleep again for a while, not because I was afraid, because the fact of someone else in the house, someone who woke up in the dark and needed an anchor, I had forgotten what that felt like to be the anchor. It was an ache and a warmth both at once, which is the exact sensation of being needed by someone who chose to need you rather than having no choice. Winona had needed me, but we had been young and we had needed each other by default, by nearness, by the shape of the life we built. This was different. Elsa had walked out of a life, away from everything, to be in this house. She had chosen it with her eyes open, knowing what she was choosing, knowing it would not be easy. That choosing was the thing I kept coming back to. There is a difference between a person who stays because they have nowhere to go and a person who stays because they decided to. That difference is everything. I had been around people who stayed with me out of obligation, and people who stayed out of politics, and people who stayed because I was chief and leaving would have meant something to their standing. I knew all those kinds of staying from the inside. This was not any of those. She had $40, a horse, and a canvas bag, and she had walked out of 22 years of her life, and she had come here and she was staying because she chose to. Every single morning she chose to. I could see it. It was not dramatic. It was just a woman going to the stove, going to the barn, going to the fence post, doing the day's work in the life she had chosen. There was a quality to it that I can only describe as intention. Everything she did had intention in it. Nothing was drifting. I started to feel it too. The intention. My own life sharpened up around me. Things that had seemed like maintenance, the work of sustaining a place and a position with nothing underneath them but duty, started to feel like they mattered again. Because she was here. Because she was watching how I moved through my own life, and she was learning me and being learned by someone who has earned that. Watching is a particular gift. It wakes you up to yourself, not in a bad way. In the way a good morning wakes you. You were asleep, and now you are not, and the day is right there. A person can be needed without feeling chosen. I had felt needed all my life. I had not felt chosen in a long time. February was the hardest month. Always is in that country. The cold stops being interesting and starts being personal. The horses were restless and the firewood was going faster than I liked, and there was a week where the sky sat low and the color of pewter and nothing in it moved. She got a letter that week. I did not read it. I saw her face after she read it and I knew enough. She folded it carefully and put it in her pocket, and she did not speak for the rest of that morning. At midday I said, "Good news or bad?" She said, "My sister, in Minnesota, she knows I left. She wants to know where I am." I said, "Do you want to tell her?" She was quiet a moment. Then she said, "I want to tell her I am safe, not where I am, just that I am safe." I said, "That seems right." She said she will worry. I said, "Worrying sisters usually do. That is what they are for." She almost smiled again, getting closer each time. She wrote back that afternoon, a short letter, and I wrote it to the post myself the next morning. When I came back, she was standing in the door of the barn with a brush in her hand, and the sorrel's neck stretched toward her, and she watched me ride in with a look on her face that I did not know how to name except to say it was the look of a person who is surprised every time that someone does the thing they said they would do. I said, "Done." She said, "Thank you." I unsaddled and went about the rest of the day, and I thought about that look on her face. 22 years of a man who probably said he would do things and then did not, or said he would be one way and was another, and the body remembers all of it. The body does not forget even when the mind tries to move on. So every time someone does the ordinary, expected, human thing, keeps their word, does what they said, shows back up, her body still registers it as surprising, as a gift. I thought about that a long time. I thought about what it cost her, over 22 years, to keep expecting it and keep being wrong. And I thought about what it meant that she was still here, still capable of that look, still able to be surprised by someone being decent to her. 22 years had not taken that from her. She had kept it somewhere, wrapped up and set aside, waiting. That said something about her that all the hard parts of her story didn't. March came and the world started letting go of winter. Reluctantly, the ground still half frozen and the air cold, but the light changing, getting longer, getting weight behind it. Spring came late that year, the way it sometimes does, dragging its heels, letting winter overstay, and then arriving all at once in a rush of mud and green that makes you forget how gray the world was 20 minutes ago. I was fixing the north fence in the first real warmth of April when she came out with water and stood at the fence post while I worked. I had my shirt off because of the heat of the labor, and I was aware of that, but I did not stop working because I was raised by a man who did not stop working simply because someone was watching. She stood and watched for a while, then she said, "Chask." I said. She said, "I want you to know something." I set the fence wire down and I turned and looked at her. She was holding the water jug against her hip, and her hair was loose the way she sometimes wore it when there was no reason to have it done up. The sun was directly behind her, and she was standing very still, the way she stood when she was about to say something she had been sitting with for a while. She said, "Before I came here, I did not think there were men like you. I thought I had seen enough men to know what men were. I said nothing. She said I was wrong. I know that now. I wanted to say it out loud to you because I think things that go unsaid can go wrong over time. Things that are spoken are harder to lose. I looked at her for a moment. Then I said, I was starting to think I was finished. Not in a desperate way, just I thought the part of my life that had that kind of warmth in it, I thought that part was past. I was managing. I was doing what needed doing. She said, and now? I said, now I am not just managing. She looked at me, the measuring look but softer, certain. She crossed the last step between us and she put her hand against my chest, just flat, the way she had put her hands against the tree, against the wall, against the table. But this was different. This was not bracing. This was choosing where to press. I put my hand over hers and kept it there. We stood like that for a while with the April sun on both of us, and the smell of new mud, and somewhere the sound of the creek running full and fast with the snowmelt. Her hand was warm. So was mine. We did not have a ceremony, not in the way that word usually means. What we had was a morning in late April, 5 months after she arrived, when she came in from the barn and found me at the table with 2 cups already made, and she sat down and picked up her cup and looked at me over the rim of it and said, I think this is it, isn't it? I said, I think so. She said, I am not in a hurry to name it. I said, nor am I. She said, but it is. I said, yes. She nodded. She drank her coffee. I drank mine. That was the conversation. That was enough. We knew what the other meant, and the thing between us was too real to be improved by more words, so we left it in the morning light where it sat well. What I want to say, what I have tried to say, telling this the way I am, circling around the center of it the way memory actually does, is that I had not expected a second life. I had not known I was waiting for one. I had closed off a set of rooms in myself 12 years ago when Winona died, and I had told myself they were closed for good and that was all right. A man does not need everything to keep going. You can go a long way on what is left after loss. But those rooms were still there, still warm, and what it took to open them was not a grand thing. It was a woman at a cottonwood tree in October pressing her hands into bark. It was a man who decided to hang a lantern and go back inside and hold the door. Those small choices, that is where a life changes. Not in the dramatic moments, though I have had those. In the quiet ones where you could just as easily have done nothing, and you chose to do something instead, and the something turned out to matter more than you could have known. I am 61 years old. I have gray hair and a bad knee from a fall 20 years ago that healed wrong, and the whole range of what happens to a body that has worked hard in a hard country. I am not the man I was at 30. I would not go back to being that man if I could. I know things now I did not know then, and the knowing is worth the cost. What I know is this. A good woman seeing your worth and choosing to stay is not a small thing. It is not a comfort or a convenience or a reward. It is the realest thing there is. It wakes up what you thought was finished. It gives the days their point back. I think about that moment sometimes. When the days pile up and the body aches and the territory changes again, and I have to go to another council and hold up another side of things that want to fall. I think about her hand on my chest and my hand on top of hers and the warmth of it. A man can get so used to being the one who holds everything up that he forgets he is allowed to be held. Not carried. I am not talking about being carried. Held. The way a good woman holds a man she has chosen. Simply. Without making a performance of it. Because she wants to, and because she knows he needs it, and because she is the kind of person whose wanting and knowing line up into something true. I had been a chief for 40 years. I had made hard calls and I had carried dead weight, and I had stood in front of things that scared me, and I had not let it show because someone had to stand there, and I was usually the one. I do not regret any of it. That is not what I am saying. I am saying that it matters. It matters more than I had let myself know. being seen by someone who chose to see you, being chosen by someone who had every reason not to choose anything ever again and chose anyway. Elsa is in the house right now. I can see the lamplight through the window from here. She will be doing something practical. She is always doing something practical. And she will not be thinking about me specifically, probably, but I am in the shape of her day the way she is in the shape of mine, and we both know it. I am going to go in. The fence can wait one more morning. The lamp is on, she is there. It is enough. No, that is not right. It is more than enough. It is what I did not know I was still waiting for.